Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on the 9th episode of Coffee Table Conversation. Coffee Table Conversation is based on the motto of a collaborative approach. We believe that the future is about collaborating, sharing of knowledge, helping each other to achieve individual and societal goals. And these conversations are medium to facilitate it. It's the 74th day of lockdown, and as a nation, we have decided to take the virus head on by calling it either Unlock 1.0 or Mission Begin Again. While we are all skeptic on how things will unravel and when will the peak reach, there is another key word which should not be ignored or forgotten is sustainable development. It's our commitment as human race to ensure that there is parity and accountability in all our actions. To explain us what is sustainability and our commitment to the Millennium Goals is Ms. Shabnam Siddiqui. She is director at the United Nations Global Compact Network, India. Shabnam holds an MA in Sociology from SNDT. She also holds a Master's in International Peace Studies from Kroc Institute of International Peace Studies and has completed the Sheving Rolls-Royce Science Innovation Policy and Leadership Program 2017 from said business school at Oxford University. She started off her career as a program coordinator at Pehchan. Post that, she was as project consultant at Bombay Sarvodaya Mandal, program manager at Public Concern for Governance Trust, and then teaching assistant at Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Post that, she joined UN and has grown up the chain ladder. UNGCNI, or in short, which is called as the Global Compact Network, GCN as abbreviated, was initiated about 20 odd years ago to get the corporate and their stakeholders to commit and promote one, doing business responsibility by aligning their strategies and operations on the 10 principles, which are on human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. While the second is taking strategic action, advance broader societal goals, such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and the emphasis on collaboration and innovation. Now, the next question, if anybody would normally have, is what are these 10 principles? While these 10 principles are based on various international conventions, and these 10 are, the first is business should support and respect the protection of internationally proclaimed human rights. Second, make sure that they are not complicit in human rights abuses. Third, business should uphold the freedom of association and effective recognition on the rights to collective bargaining. The elimination of all forms of forced and compulsory labor. Effective abolition child labor is the fifth. Sixth, the elimination of discrimination is in respect of employment and occupation, that is gender sensitization. Seventh is business should support precautionary approach to the environment challenges. Eighth, undertake initiative to promote greater environmental responsibility. Ninth, encourage development and diffusion of environment-friendly technologies. And 10th, which is a big concern lately, is business should again work against corruption in all forms, including extortion and bribery. To take us all on how United Nations, the Global Compact Network works with corporates, what are these 10 principles, how are they implemented, and what are their initiatives in India, is what Shabnam will try to cover. And then we'll get a little bit up close personal with her on her passion and etc. Thank you so much for joining us, Shabnam, this evening. And I know it's not one of the best times to be talking about sustainable development, but what do you think how these 10 goals will impact, how corporates can add, and what should ideally be the future to look
at? Thank you, Neil, for that extensive introduction. It's all there on LinkedIn, so anybody who cares to know more can just go there. It's a weekend evening. I'm sure a lot of students are busy with other things. But to talk more about the Global Compact, the United Nations Global Compact Network, it's a UN initiative for businesses, as you mentioned, established 2 decades ago. The idea at one of the World Economic Forum meetings in 1999 was that since business is a part of society's problem, they needed to be a part of the solution also. And that's how the compact came around. The compact essentially is a covenant between the businesses and the global compact to adhere to the 10 principles that you have outlined. And the idea is that year on year, the members of the global compact, whether they are businesses or non-business members, they will both act on the 10 principles, 4 issue areas, and report on it. Now, acting at a generic level is possible, but when you have to report year on year, you really need to find things to report on. And when we're talking about reporting on progress, it does not mean that everybody has achieved the goals that they started out with, because we know achievement of long-ended goals does take, like it's a long-term investment, sustainable development. But what are we doing and what are the challenges and how are we dealing with challenges? So the principles came around in 2000, and in 2015, as you know, we started with the Sustainable Development Goals. This was a progressive growth from the Millennium Development Goals that were active from 2000 to 2015 all over the world. But the difference between the MDGs and the SDGs essentially was that MDGs was predominantly a responsibility of the state. So nations had to report on it, and civil society did shadow reporting of what was achieved in terms of eradicating hunger and poverty and gender discrimination. But over the years, it was realized that other stakeholders also needed to play an active role in the attainment of goals. And so the Sustainable Development Goals are more open-ended. Businesses, for example, have a clear-cut responsibility of implementing it, and that's how the Global Compact has a much greater role, as the stakeholders, the business stakeholders of the Global Compact are committed and implementing SDG priority areas in their geographical and thematic areas of expertise. To give an example, like over the last 15, first the MDGs and now 5 years of the SDGs, a lot of corporates have worked on gender, like, you know, we have something called a target gender equality. So how do you ensure both equal number of participation and leadership of men and women within your corporate structure? There's a lot of work on livelihoods that corporates are engaged in. So earlier, what was just the corporate social responsibility, CSR, how can that work be made more sustainable? There's work on water harvesting, because even though we appreciate the rains, I think Mumbai got a lot of rains today also. But how do we harvest the rains, because monsoon does not last the entire year, and so on and so forth. So different corporates have taken ownership of different SDGs and the principles that we are working on, and have been reporting year on year progress. For those interested, I think what can also be done is the Global Compact website, essentially globalcompact.in. If you go there, you'll find that every year we have a competition amongst corporates for case studies of what work they are doing on sustainable development, and then that those case studies are evaluated by a jury from cross-cutting areas. So that is something that people can go online and have a look on. So essentially, that is the setup. Global Compact exists in as network in 80 plus countries, but our businesses are active in 170 countries. So that's a huge network that we are talking about.
So one way to look at it is you take corporates, and corporates have to sign up on these whole initiatives that they will adhere,
yes,
and they have to implement it across the world wherever they have presence, which includes,
and not only to implement but to report on it, because reporting is extremely essential. If you miss reporting in 1 year, then you can get delisted from the network.
So what are the benefits when any corporate signs up on UN network, basically Global Compact network? What are the benefits that they take home from there? I mean, incentives.
I think essentially, it's more like a niche kind of a group, in the sense that, for example, if you are an investor and if you're looking for scouting for businesses anywhere in the world, and if you come across a Global Compact member, that is that credibility that this is the kind of group that will be at least adhering to the principles and reporting on it. So that kind of a value addition we get. But more than that, because business is a lot of about networks and the value chain, we introduce people to both businesses that could entail direct profits, but also collective action with other corporates, so that they can, whatever work they are doing in sustainability can be more deepened and widened. So both these things happen simultaneously.
Uh, One of the things which normally we all will be very curious, I'm personally curious, is one of the examples that if you can share with us that how a corporate which signed up with you and their whole processes got changed and how they have become more sustainable in that levels that is expected.
So I think because like the problem with when you have a membership of 300 odd members, and if in a live discussion I mentioned only one corporate, I might be not that good a strategy as such. But what I can do is from the participants list, I see like I've seen that Dr. Joy Deshmukh, she was global head CSR for TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, one of our premium global compact companies. She's on board, and I had sent her a warning at the beginning of the conversation that I would ask her to join in. So maybe Joy can shed more light on how the global compact principles help in taking a business further. Joy, please.
Yeah, thanks, Shabnam. Yeah, it was a great experience to be part of the Global Compact Network, because what typically happens is that companies will attend to that area of business responsibility which connects with their nature of business. So then if it is a mining company, they'll do it in a certain way. If it's a service company, they'll do it in a certain way. And to bring all those threads together to understand how our different efforts can make a difference to the country and to the world at large. Global Compact Network played a tremendous role in giving that direction. So then we could understand the connections between the global dialogues and what we were doing at the company level, and how that made sense both for our own country and for the globe in general.
Interesting. Ma'am, can you share
anything more you would like to
can you share one of the processes that you implemented or they guided you on? That will be good for the participants to understand how there was this whole sync that was done.
See, are you asking me in the connection with TCS?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I've retired now from TCS, but what I can say is that since it's an IT service company, very obviously the focus was on skilling and education, on developing the best possible human resources for the country, because TCS was fortunate enough to be able to get the best possible human resources for their own company. So it is like you give back to society what you take from society, which is a larger Tata principle also. Having said that, there was a very strong environmental consciousness which was inside the fence. So whether it was e-waste or whether it was our large campuses or whatever it was we did, and wherever we were, the cognizance was taken of all the factors, hygiene factors, which an environment sensitive company should do. And if you want to see the lines are very blurred. So for example, there was a CSR project around the water shortage in the areas like Vidarbha. Now there obviously it was because of, there used to be the drought conditions. So do you put that under health? Do you put that under livelihoods? Do you put that under environment? So like I always say that human rights is like a round room with several doors. And whichever door you open, whether it's health, education, environment, whatever it is that you enter in, you reach the same room. It's a whole collection of interconnected issues that come, and you cannot bypass one for the other. But as personally, my take is that whatever policies are put into place, whatever activities are done, be there at the national level, state level, CSR level, aid agencies, whatever it is, it has to be environmentally sensitive. Because if people and planet do not survive or do not live in coexistence, then one of them, there is a chance that one will make it and the other will not. And that doesn't make sense for the entire world, doesn't make sense for markets, it doesn't make sense for a healthy exchange of any kind of market, whether it is consumer markets, labor markets, whatever markets you're talking about. So sustainability and that triad which we talk of, people, planet, and profits, the people and the planet are the primary pillars. So you can't say I'm going to focus on people and the planet can, go take a long walk. It doesn't happen that way. You can't say I'll only focus on environment and people will just be a number somewhere in my books, or it will be a factor of production. It doesn't work that way. So both have to sustain, and only then you can have any meaningful market activity.
Interesting. That's actually correct, ma'am. I was just reading a report on, and Shabnam can add into this. I was reading a report on United Nations on the COVID-19 yesterday. United Nations is basically saying that as much we will keep on impacting and getting close to the nature, you will have this cross references of these events happening again and again. So COVID may be just like a beginning of the whole cycle is what they are indicating, because they're saying as we keep on entering towards their domain and the forest and etc., we may end up having these events happening, something like COVID or something else, events occurring a little bit again and again, and hence the equilibrium needs to be created at some level, which becomes more important than ever. So the challenges remains is how do you have growth and you can have profits at the same time you have sustainable or a proper environment. It's a classic catch-22, but maybe that is where the equilibrium needs to be devised. I think Shabnam can add on this next.
Yeah, definitely. And I think yesterday we celebrated the World Environment Day, and the theme for this World Environment Day 2020 was biodiversity. And the tagline was, "It's time for nature." And it's definitely the time for nature because being in lockdown, so it's the first time ever, I think, that the whole world together has been in a complete lockdown and at short notice, and a new normal emerging for all of us as individuals and definitely for corporates. So within the new normal, what can be done, how business can operate, how does this people, prosperity, partnership, profits can all go together. And so those are the kind of things that are now really emerging. Within this current scenario, I think the role of the UN agencies, and especially the Global Compact, is much more heightened, because new normal, for example, the kind of experimentations done in different countries, what will work in India, what will not work, what needs to be tweaked to Indian standards, is something that we'll be experimenting with in the next couple of months, and hopefully together we can evolve new strategies to take the work forward, especially at a time when we all know within the businesses that there has been a lot of losses, financial losses. So how do we make up for the financial losses without really going back on any of the commitments of the Global Compact, because we know that in a rush to prosper and in a rush to compete with our neighbors, we might be really messing up with basic human rights. So how do you go ahead? How do you negotiate the spaces is something that is more important as we go forward.
Interesting. So we just got one question which has come in, and everyone else can actually keep on pouring their question as we go continue. There's one question which has come, which either you or Dr. Mukherjee can speak on. Is can you put some light on the mandatory CSR activity the company for the company, And do you think it encourages the company to do more activities when government makes it mandatory?
So there are pluses and minuses of anything that is made mandatory. So I think from our side, one thing about the mandatory aspect was that there became a guidelines and a framework. So you know how much minimum you have to spend, and that's minimum, right? It is not the maximum. So you start off with that, and then depending on what your leadership is in it for, you can expand your resource base. We have one kind of CSR funding, but beyond CSR funding, depending on the size of the corporate and the resources that it has, there is funds available under sustainability, there's fund available under communication, a whole lot of funds that other stakeholder groups have access to. The entire idea of a good corporate is how it assesses and responds to the need of not only its shareholders, but also its customers and other stakeholders at large. Because when you are just limiting the scope of involvement to shareholders, the strategies will be very different than to the customers. And beyond the shareholders and customers, I would personally like to say that with the Global Compact companies, when your commitment is higher, so when your commitment is to UN guiding principles, then you take a step forward and do things even beyond the realm of CSR. So that becomes those baby steps that are important where you start off with, and then of course you go further. So mandatory aspect does help in amplifying the work. The negative, of course, is that we know that we are smart people. So anything that is mandatory, we would have ways of we will be smart enough ourselves, or we'll have smart enough consultants onboarded who can tell us how to get out of the aspect and where to put money in. So pros and cons, but definitely a conscious investment in corporate social responsibility, one, and in reporting to a framework, a complete accountability of where you spend the money, how the decision was taken, what was the impact, what would be the way forward. That definitely is important, and it will help in the long run.
So let's take the conversation to a little bit different now, is the SDG that we were talking. Sure. And not everybody is completely aware that the GCN network, actually the Global Compact Network, plays a very important role in the smart cities development. And you have signed up with Thane Municipal Corporation, Pune for that matter, as an MOU where you want to implement, when they are implementing the smart city, you want to implement the SDG principles. So if you can give a little bit light on this, because I don't think anybody is pretty much aware of this, that there is a role being played by the United Nations in the smart city development network.
Yes, essentially, so predominantly the Global Compact is a business UN initiative of businesses. So business is our main stakeholder. That is the premise that we start on. And within the smart cities in 2015, they came up as a corporate entity. So they were under the Companies Act and all that. Now, on that premise, we started working on the smart city. The idea was, so within the Global Compact, my responsibility is for the 10th principle. So I'm basically an anti-corruption person working in the field of anti-corruption for the last almost 2 decades. And initially the work was with smaller units and smaller types of bribes. But now within the business scenario, we're talking about big procurement. So when the entire thing about smart cities came up, the idea of developing cities, and we know infrastructure is an area which has a lot of gray market, or which has the potential to have a big gray market. We thought, why not have checks and balances in place before the money starts changing hands? So on that premise, we started working with smart cities. We came up with a governance framework. We came up with procurement guidelines, because sometimes procurement is one area that is most in the gray aspect as to what works, what does not, what you can get away with. So we have come up with procurement guidelines. We have come up with risk assessment tools, both for businesses, because not only the government, but business, when it invests money in cities, there has to be ways that the money is safeguarded, because that eventually is people's money also. So we kind of played the role of facilitator. And at that time in 2016, so we had these round tables in 5 cities: Mumbai, not Mumbai, sorry, Pune, Ranchi, Bhubaneswar, Lucknow, and Visakhapatnam. 5 different cities, 5 different regions, because in India is a diverse country, and the challenges and the opportunities of each region is different. And predominantly, what emerged in the first round of discussion was that people in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities were still by and large did not have too much exposure to corruption. So the potential of corruption was low, and within the scenario, if we could put safeguard, that would be better. Also, the potential for development was much more, because metros have been bulging at the seams. They are really exhausted. So how does the tier 2, tier 3 cities develop? And while working, so when we work with cities, Pune, we have an MOU, but we have engaged with many other cities across the country. We realized that so everybody is working around SDGs. So just for your students and for your audience, there are 17 sustainable development goals. The 17 sustainable development goals look at the social, economic aspect of environmental aspect of our daily lives, all that we live in. And because the projects were aligned to the needs that came up under the SDGs, we thought, why not we do an evaluation of, because essentially what the sustainable development goals are, they are a framework for action. It's a very strong framework with indicators, with targets. So if you're doing one particular activity, so for example, if one particular city says that we want to work on clean water, which is SDG 6, how are you doing it? What are the targets? What are the indicators of success? How do you take forward? So it gives you numbers. So that is what we have managed to do for Thane. We have helped them analyze their work according to what is existing on the ground, which now is helping them to plan. So now, right now, we have evaluated them on the basis of existing projects. But on the basis of that, cities can then plan according to SDGs, which would help them monitor and evaluate their own work and strategize better. So that is the role kind of SDGs are doing. SDG assessment in corporates happens year on year. So all the big corporates have their own SDG assessment, but not cities and urban governance. And in the recent Niti Aayog, so Niti Aayog is the agency kind of responsible for the sustainable development goals in the country. They come up with periodic reports, annual assessments. Even their report says how localization of SDGs is most crucial for their implementation. Because being at the center and being at the state level also, you cannot really promote or process what can happen on the ground. And small centers of like urban governance units like cities and city municipalities can play a much larger role. So localization of SDGs is what we have been working on. And it's really worked well because, for example, share an incident when we were working in Thane. As we know, everybody works in silos in our government departments. So the sewage people and the education people and everybody else, they don't much interact with each other or would know what's happening. For the SDGs, when we got everybody into the room, they had so much more knowledge to share and exchange and plan together. So that is what we are hoping that can happen across cities. So it's been an interesting work. It's just begun and we hope to take it further.
Interesting, and I'm sure very few people know about this initiative. It's been
initially when we started, people did not even know that there were 17 goals. Some thought there were 14, some thought 15. Like, everybody had their own number from wherever it had come from. So just to know how many goals, and with goals that there are targets for achievement, and targets have indicators. So you just cannot say, okay, we have achieved clean water for the city of Mumbai. How have you evaluated that? So that kind of evaluation framework becomes more important. Otherwise, we know that for us to announce breaking news and victories is so easy these days. So that really puts things into perspective.
I agree. There's some follow-up questions which have come. So any memory or moment would you like to share when a particular company went out of box to uplift the society? I think you can't answer this. I'm sure we can ask Dr. Joy. If she can answer this question, if TCS did something out of box for that I think the next related question is anti-corruption. Do you think CSR is a place where corruption is or money laundering can take place? And the third question is your memory. Would you like to share on any measure to prevent it? So I think we'll take the first question with Dr. Joy, and then from there, I think we can take the next two questions on anti-corruption with you.
Sure.
Yeah, so yeah, what I would like to give as an example from TCS is that very typically an IT service company would invest in building skills around IT. But what TCS has been doing for decades now is investing in adult literacy. And being the head of CSR in TCS, oftentimes I would be asked that why is it that you guys are interested in adult literacy? How does it help your business? How does it make any difference to you? So it was like a ridiculous question, because when you have a larger perspective of nation building and you realize that there's a considerable amount of population, almost 25%, that is illiterate, it doesn't make sense for development per se. So we never gave up on adult literacy and taking it forward. And we had amazing results from it, huge numbers. I cannot remember them in detail right now, because as I said, I've retired, so the numbers would have also increased and shifted. But we had learners from the age of 9 to 90. Now you will say 9, why 9? Shouldn't she be in school? But she was married off at 9, a child marriage, with no hopes of going to school. So she said, I want to join the adult literacy class. And she learned to read, write, and do arithmetic. And TCS had built a software in-house, which took into principles the how an adult learns. So an adult doesn't learn like a child learns. So a native speaker of a language knows how to speak it, but doesn't know how the word works. So it began with words, broke it down to alphabets, and all of this was done in-house. So otherwise it would take 200 hours to make a person literate. But with the TCS software, it took 50 hours only. And that was going out of the box, because it had nothing to do with, taking business forward. It had a larger goal of nation building. It had a larger goal of not leaving out a cohort that had missed the bus.
It reminds me, if you remember, in the 80s and late 80s and 90s, you had the campaign which is Padhna Likhna Seekho. Oh, Mehnat Karne Walo was the campaign that the government ran, because they wanted adult literacy to jump, and it was very poor at that moment. And this was a very innovative, out of box thinking that you create a software for that matter. Very interesting. Shabnam, we'll take the next part of the question, which says...
No, and just to add on to the earlier one, Neil, the current SG, the UN Secretary General, the entire premise behind getting businesses onboarded within the Global Compact and the UN systems, which was predominantly a government-based establishment, was that the appetite for taking a risk, the appetite to think out of the box is something that is a very business thing. And that is not something that other stakeholder groups were focused on. So business being a part of the UN and the Global Compact, playing such a big role globally, is the very fact that businesses are especially now, even when you see startups and all these breakthrough technologies, how economically they will have out of the box ideas to take things forward. So that is definitely most businesses, or all businesses within the Global Compact and otherwise, that has the risk-taking appetite and out of the box thinking that's so important for any kind of development that we see. Now, regards anti-corruption and the basic question whether there is money laundering can take place, I think a simple thing that wherever there is money, laundering can take place. Okay, so there is money, it will change hands, people involved, it will work, unless there are checks and balances appropriate. And I think CSR accountability is a very important aspect now that companies are grappling with. We have to realize that different kind of CSRs exist because a lot of the companies now have foundations also. So big companies will have their own foundations, will have their own academic institutions, will have their own hospitals. So there are ways to channel the CSR funds, and how can we have more accountability and people involvement and more transparency is something that the Global Compact is also working on. So that I think is what we're talking about. CSR and direct anti-corruption, we usually don't mix the two because there's a potential for it to be volatile. Within even a business establishment, if you see with the public sector and private sector, the CSR professionals and the team will be quite different, and the compliance people, compliance in the private sector and vigilance people in the public sector, their reporting format is also different, so that there is more with accountability, there's some kind of space for both to grow.
I think Dr. Joy has a question for you.
Yeah. I just wanted to add one thing. I love that sentence which Shabnam said, that where there's money, there's laundering. But having said that, there is a huge reputation risk. So if that's one thing. So if you're worried about the reputation of your company, then there is this very less to nil chances of, something like money laundering happening. Secondly, are you governed by a value system or a code of conduct? So for example, all the Tata companies have a Tata code of conduct, which are values inbuilt, and when we join the company, everyone signs that document. So this kind of, very base level value system, which is ingrained, which is in the DNA of companies, also determines the chance of something like money laundering happening.
And I think money laundering is too big a word, like it's too strong a word. I think most small level of here and there dealings, those kind of things happen. Money laundering is a criminal offense, so not necessarily CSR, but the potential for money change hands is there always.
I think that will remain. So people, I think you can keep on asking and pouring in your questions. We get a little bit up close with Shabnam right now, and I want to let you all know she is a wildlife photographer, passionately wildlife photographer, and she's been on some shows and she's been invited on some shows to talk about her passion about wildlife. And I have always been very jealous of her because she gets to go to all these big forests, and I go to the same forest and I don't see a tiger, but she ends up seeing so many of them, and then she shares a video and I get very jealous about it. So I'm being very candid about my jealousy factor. So maybe she can tell us how she went into this whole passion about photography in wildlife and follow through it very diligently, where she keeps on going and visiting different places and sanctuaries and clicking photographs and sharing it across. I'll just share a link as she speaks.
Okay, so I think wildlife is the best subject to get me started on, because and it's a very recent passion that I have. In fact, friends who know me from before are surprised that I do photography, and that too wildlife. I'm from Mumbai, and if you know Bombay well, there are not many spaces for doing any kind of wildlife in and around Bombay. Maximum you can do some birding here and there, but not much. And I moved into my current responsibility at the United Nations Global Compact 9 years ago now. This is the 10th year. And Delhi is good in the sense that Delhi has a lot of national parks in and around it, within 4 to 5 hours of driving distance. From Bombay, if you drive down, I think it will take you 2 hours to get out of the city. And then maximum in 4 hours, you might have reached Lonavala or someplace and not beyond. So, but in Delhi, the spaces are much more, the parks. And I happened to just be on one of the group safaris long ago in 2011, and also was lucky enough to see the tiger on the first safari itself. And that kind of first locking of eyes with a tigress in one of the parks was where this entire love affair, as I said, with wildlife started. And the more I go to the jungles, the more I realize that the way we thought that, like, when things are not going right, when there are no rules to be followed, we think that it is jungle Raj. On the contrary, if you go to the jungle, you realize that in the jungle, everything is in a very orderly fashion. So in our civilized world, now we are talking about circular economy, of how things need to be used, how Amazon needs to take its packaging back and everything else. But if you go to the jungles, not one thing gets wasted. Everything is utilized, whether it is fruit, whether there is vegetation, whether it is whatever. So I think that kind of a thing, there's boundaries that animals follow. So of course, when you cross boundaries, there are also conflicts. But it's a very beautiful world. They adapt to climate. The food habits are very adaptable to what the season will offer. They don't necessarily need mangoes and Alfonso mangoes when it is not the mango season. They will eat whatever is there. When things dry up in a jungle, there's a lot of symbiotic relationship. So, for example, I saw this tree. The deers eat the leaves and the monkeys are on top. But as summer catches up and all the leaves below are eaten up, it's only the leaves on the top that remain. And these monkeys will go on top of the trees and shake the trees so that the leaves fall down so that the deers can have them. And that, it's not a taught relationship. So, but the way they learn that from their parents and the way things take forward. So it's a very fascinating world out there, and I've really, really enjoyed. But also what I've seen is that the jungles are shrinking because of the unplanned economic development is important. So, but the development is not being planned, keeping the ecosystem in mind. And so within the Global Compact, now what we are trying to do is we are trying to form this Business Alliance for Biodiversity Conservation. That's one of my pet initiatives that I'm really, really focusing on. The idea is that a lot of big businesses and small businesses are investing in biodiversity conservation. So, for example, you'll have people within their CSR and sustainability budgets working on mangroves. Some people are working on species conservation, so saving the bustard, investing in tiger protection and all that. But all this is being done in a piecemeal manner. And what we are saying to the businesses, can we just come together, share experiences? So, for example, if 5 different groups, 5 different corporates are working on mangrove conservation, do we have learning to share with each other? Do we have challenges? And can we take up a space and do work collectively? Because not everybody has the money to last a lifetime. So A corporate can invest in 3 years, and then 4th year B corporate takes it over for the next 3 years. In that way, the sustainability of the initiative gets ensured. Otherwise, you plant trees for 1 year and 2 years and 3 years. Trees take 10 years to develop, but there's nobody else to take care of its maintenance going forward. So how, as collective action, we can work together, form a business alliance, have collective action, and take up projects that are much more sustainable and impactful in the long term. So wildlife continues to guide me. Wildlife continues to give me. So now, though, all of us are lucky that we are comparatively breathing fresh air and seeing blue skies in many places. I've seen a lot of, though I've been in lockdown in Delhi, my friends and family from Bombay keep sending me these beautiful skies from Bombay and sunsets and all that, which was not possible earlier. But because of the jungles, I have managed to breathe fresh air whenever I go to them. And I try that at least once or twice a month, I go into a forest if they are open. The luck factor, it's not only luck with wildlife. You just don't go into the jungle and expect to see tigers as Neil does. But you have to keep consistently going. And even if you're visiting a jungle once, at least 4 safaris, at least you have to invest that kind of time and have patience to get your sighting. So I think, like everything else, patience and perseverance really, really helps to take things forward.
Okay, I'll take that as a note to home, saying that I need to go to Tadoba again to check out if I can see.
And at least 4 safaris, not passing by. So you cannot hop, skip, and jump from one gate to the other and expect to see a tiger.
So 4 safaris in the same gate.
Same gate, same place. That's how it works. It doesn't work otherwise.
This I never knew. I thought 4 safaris, any gates. Okay.
No, for
This is
safari, one day, because tigers have their specific routes, specific timing, and most times when you go into a jungle, you might not have seen the tiger has seen you. Their senses are much more sharper than us, and on seeing you, it has not emerged from the bushes. So you cannot expect that everybody will come in front of you to do a catwalk. And I think that is that respect for jungle and the species is important. Only then they bless you with sightings.
I think I can ask anybody has any questions, please raise their hand. We take it into this quick questions with Shabnam, but also Dr. Joy is here, so I'm going to ask the parallel questions to her also, so that I get benefit of learning from both of them. Rather,
Of
we all
course.
get benefit from learning from both of them. So my first quick question to both of you is one unique thing that you have done during this lockdown, which your family will say that yes, this is something that they have done and we agree this is unique.
Mm. Yeah, I think rather than collectively, it has been a pleasure to see that each one has come into their own in areas which they otherwise were not, so keen on. So, for example, all the cooking is almost done by my husband. Now he knows to cook, but the pleasure that he's getting now of being in the kitchen, I had not seen before. And I, for one, have been paying attention to myself, which I think after decades of working, you forget how to do it. So I'm learning that. I won't even say relearning because I think I never learned it. And then yeah, I have a daughter who's working from home. So I'm trying to, instill this work-life balance thing with her and trying to get her to understand that, that there are lines which are blurred when you work from home, but you have to kind of determine those lines yourself. So I think collectively we have all been learning. And then of course I learned how to get onto Zoom, which was huge because I was avoiding it for a long time. Yeah, and that's a lighter thing, but there's a lot of introspection which happens in a time like COVID, and then you realize that there are several things that you were doing before which actually were not important or even needed. So much as several people want to, rush out there and go and have a meal and go traveling and all that, I'm finding that I'm liking this very simple kind of a life. So maybe, that's what I will continue to be doing. Not be scampering all over the place in the pursuit of happiness, as they say.
Shabnam, what will be your one thing?
Multiple things, but I think vis-a-vis family, I'm sure they're just surprised that I could manage to stay. So I'm a person before the lockdown who was, as I mentioned, traveling throughout, traveling for work and traveling for photography. So weekdays, weekends, I was out all the time, and just being in one place, everybody thought that I would feel cooped up. But I have not yet, and we are already in the unlock phase. And the same thing as Joy, because this entire realization to your surrounding has been enormous. Because most of the times our scheduling is so back to back that we're always rushing from one thing to the other. And now while we are working from home, I think the biggest factor is that the travel time for anything has come down to zero. So we are at least saving 2 to 3 hours of travel time every day in meetings, in just going to work. And what I have been doing is doing a lot of photography and bird photography. So essentially, I'm a cat person in the jungles, but in Delhi, no cats have yet come to my house for me to photograph. But I've been blessed to be surrounded by greenery, and now I have started noticing seasons. So when we went into lockdown in March, it was early spring, and because I'm so conscious now of the trees and the birds, I've literally seen trees flourish in front of my eyes, the leaves getting bigger and bigger. Most of the birds are now in their breeding season. To see big birds, like, and then their chicks and their kind of relationship. So there's a lot of learning and growing that has been happening, and a lot of photography. I hope to be, in fact, in the last 10 days, I'm also documenting only one particular species. And I hope to come up with a documentary in a month's time.
That's interesting. I look forward for that.
Yes, me too.
So the next question is a little bit tough, but I hope both of you will have an answer. Is one event in your life which you believe that changed you as a person forever?
Wow. There have been several events like that.
We'll pick one.
Yeah, I see. Professionally, there have been several events. Meeting the amazing kind of people that I've worked with, people who taught me so much, mentored me. But I would say the event that completely changed my life was probably the birth of my daughter, because not only did I see her as, okay, my daughter, baby, whatever, but I've always considered her to be my equal. So my style of parenting was very different. So we were like equals. We were like, I wouldn't say friends because that's a kind of a cliche terminology, but a very healthy mutual respect for each other. And touch wood, that still continues. And I think that that event not just changed me at her birth, but it keeps changing me almost on a daily basis, making me a better person. As they say, that there are certain people who bring out the better you. So she's the one person who brings out the better me. Yeah.
That's quite inspirational. That's quite
Yeah.
inspirational. Shabnam, your one moment of life.
Well, like, with the kind of years that we have lived, one moment of life is never enough, as Joy was mentioning. But I think for me, this entire sojourn into jungles has really helped me because I was never known to be a patient person. So I am a
Yeah.
taskmaster. I do expect a lot. I give a lot and I expect a lot in terms of personal and professional dynamics. And the jungles have taught me to be more kind, compassionate. And as I had was mentioning yesterday, that nature does not rush but gets everything accomplished. So how do we just this entire thing of letting go has helped. And now when you ask this question, I was wondering that if that thing had not happened for the last 3-4 years with me, the way I would have responded to this lockdown would have been so much more different.
Right.
Now just knowing that there's a bigger plan, there's a bigger being that makes the entire world work, has made a difference. So jungles have definitely made a difference to me in terms of patience. It's also given to me a lot of my best relationships in terms of friendships and partners in work also. So it has been life changing.
So, Chentu, I'm going to go to the national park from tomorrow.
It is not open yet, no?
It's still not open. Yeah, it's still open. Okay. Simpler one this time. One book you would recommend all of us to read.
Wow. So my favorite book through time has always been To Kill a Mockingbird, because I found that not just a fascinating take of a period of history where there was a huge struggle for equality, but the fact that it is told through the eyes of a child. So I thought that, and since I write poetry myself, I'm a writer. So I thought that the way to tell a story through the eyes of a child was something which was the work of a genius. So that's definitely one of my favorite books. The other one about society is William Golding's, which is that
Lot of
the name?
flies.
Lord of the
Lot
Flies.
of
Yes,
flies.
I could never get that out of my mind. And the very fact that how societal relationships get built at a very young age. And you know, we talk of socialization, we talk about innate human nature, and that really brings you to the fore. It holds up the mirror to ask you, you know, that is this what a human being is? So these are the two books which impacted me a great deal. Otherwise, there are several other books which, you know, in different ways have changed my perspective, changed my way of life. But these two are the ones which I will carry with me, you know, to the end of my days.
I personally would not recommend any book for people in general because all of us have different tastes in reading books. For example, I cannot read autobiographies, even though it's highly recommended and part of like successful people they read autobiographies of others. I do not have an appetite for autobiographies, but a couple of my favorite books. One, an old one, it's called The History of God by Karen Armstrong. Karen Armstrong was also one of my professors in the US. And what she essentially had done was she had become a nun at a very young age and then decided to explore God further. And then written this book which traces how humans have created God over centuries and what is the like step on step progression which basically talks lets you know that there's not much difference as such, but how do we respond to uncertainties, how do we respond to nature, how do we respond to things beyond our control. So that has been a book that helped shape your thought process in general. And recently I read a book called 40 Rules of Love by Elif Shafak, a Turkish writer, which is a conversation between Jalaluddin Rumi, the Sufi poet, and his mentor, and they discuss this entire relationship. So that book is about relationships between humans, between human and God, and what is required, what are the rules of love that we as humans need to follow. So these two books are something that I really really like. These are books that I would read and reread and also give to people.
These are differ very diverse, because ninth episode of my coffee table conversations is giving me complete different perspective of books to read, which is so exciting, very fascinating.
Yes, different people, different choices.
Yeah.
Fascinating because it gives me an idea that or every participant also an idea that what should you look around. There are other
And
things
there's one, and that's another book, Neil. Now, The Secret Life of Trees. So that talks about how this entire, so what we see about trees is only above the ground, but how the roots are interconnected, how the roots communicate, and how does the world survive. So that's one book that I think people should really catch up, The Secret Life of Trees.
Interesting. Both of you have been at the top levels of your career. Sabnam is, and you have been, ma'am. Dr. Joy has been, and you are right now, Sabnam. So, one advice that you have given or will give as a mentor, one advice or very loosely, which I don't like to use, is called the Guru Mantra, but I don't like to use those words. Hence, I have used the word advice you would give or have given as a mentor to anybody.
Yeah, so there are a lot of pieces of advice that, when you go through a long career that you give to your teams and all. But there's a piece of advice which I give, not only give others, but I keep telling myself too. And, have to kind of remind myself also that when you say do your best, it is contextual. It is contextual in a period of time, in a set of circumstances. It's like a constraint maximization problem. You know, you're within 4 equations and you're trying to do your best. So when you evaluate that best at another point of time, in another context, it may not seem like the best. And that's when you become very hard on yourself and you start feeling like a loser. So keeping this in mind, that doing your best at a point in time is still the best. And at another point of time, you may again do your best, and that is again still the best. And both are okay. So I always recommend to people to learn the actual meaning of the 2 words, it's okay.
This is
You know, I'm not saying that with excuses, but in this kind of a competitive society that we live in, where we are told that we always have to excel, we have to do this, we have to do that, we have to become perfect, we have to. Most of the time, we don't feel okay because we don't say it's okay. So, you know, just learning how to say it's okay and then feeling that, then you feel okay.
very nice. Don't be harsh on yourself. That's a good take home.
Yeah, and I think just connected to that is what similar thing, that kindness and compassion are 2 things that are most important, both of for other people, but especially for yourself, because you have to be kind to yourself before you're kind to anyone else. And I think everybody that we encounter, whether we know their stories or we don't know their stories, people are fighting a tough battle. So that kind of kindness, compassion helps. And what will help you to be more kind and compassionate, or perhaps more positive in a competitive world where we are always comparing ourselves to others, is just to look back and to see where you have come from 5 years and 10 years ago. To see where you were 5 years ago, see where you are 10 years ago, and see the growth, hopefully, that you have made. Because your personal journeys are much more important than comparing, like, apples and peaches kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So looking at your own journeys and being kind to yourself and compassionate to yourself. So whatever you do with yourself, you will do with others. I think that's most important in a person.
Right.
Okay, what I'll do is I'll take the last question on this one. There is one question. There's one question which I have to ask. But before that, there is a question which has come for Shapnam, which is, Shapnam, can you please throw some light on carbon credits and how has it been, benefiting Indian corporates as such? My best memory is carbon credits are pretty much not worth as a concept. Is my best memory on it.
Depends. So, for example, carbon credits is not something that we have learned yet to. And this is a discussion that we're having in one of our current projects that I'm dealing with, because this entire calculation of credits, the measuring of credits, and how and where you'll utilize it is something that Indian corporates, and Joy can correct me, has not evolved much. So especially because we are in India, a lot of family-owned businesses, even the big ones. So how do we calculate credit? How do we trade credits? How do we benefit from it? Is something that we need to learn. But comparatively, if you see some of the multinationals, the big ones, they do know what to do with their credits. So it's a discussion that we are having continuously. It's not a big ticket as far as I know in India yet, but what carbon credits can do is make businesses carbon neutral, and even that kind of branding will help reduce emissions of businesses. So what we are trying to, instead of trading credits, we're looking at carbon credits to make a corporate or a business carbon neutral, which basically means that whatever emissions they are causing, they are like kind of paying up for them. So it's still a long way to go within our country, is my own understanding.
So what I'm doing right now, I'm trying to document the daily routines of successful people. I'm trying to figure out if there is some variable that matches somewhere. It it's only the 9th episode, so we're still far away. I'm sure the variables required at least 100. So both of you have to, this is my last question. I'm not going to ask you any other question except your closing words then. And Dr. Joy, because she's a poet now, she has to at least sing or at least
No, no, no,
tell
no,
us a
no, no, no,
paragraph.
no.
One para. I'm not going to ask more than that. One stanza or something. That's it. One stanza is what you're
No, I need a book. I can't remember, and you caught me unawares.
Okay, so I'm very obsessed with daily routines by all these successful people, and I want to really understand what are those innate things that make them successful. What are those small variables that make them successful? So, if you could share with us, what are your daily routines like? Just to give you a primer, I have heard from small idea like what I have heard people who told me they get up at 3:30 in the morning is when their day starts, and they start their day at 3:30 and they end their day at about 10:30 in the night because they have their own work and etc. But it obviously depends on which segment of industry you belong to and what you work around. So, what's your daily routine like? That's the small question.
Yeah, okay. Since I've retired, I think I don't have a routine. I was so time bound by the clock when I was, in the job. But having said that, over months, I realized that it's important to have at least certain things going on a daily basis so that it becomes a habit. And they say that it takes about 21 days of repetition of something if you want to make it a habit. So, for example, waking up at a certain time. So, I do not wake up very early. I wake up at 6:30. I do some pranayam, do some yoga. Then now, because we don't have any help, so obviously there's the kitchen, and then we are alternating between both of us, my husband and I. But having said that, what I would like to add is the one thing which I realized all through my life, and this is through experience, is that when I would focus only on one thing, whether it was, the family or whether it was work, I tended to get out of balance. And I would not be the best version of myself. Till I realized that I was not doing something which nourishes my soul. And being a writer, and being a creative writer, that was the most important thing which I tended to neglect. Plus, I would always enjoy, like, some amount of embroidery or some ridiculous thing like, stringing beads together or taking an old dupatta and doing some, embroidery on it. And it was so meditative because I was working with my hands. I was totally focused on it. I was creating something new which gave me happiness. It was nourishing my soul. So, identifying the things that nourish your soul is very important to keep the balance. Else, life with its myriad issues and problems and things to solve, and whether they're large or small or whatever, will always tend to it's like riding a bicycle. It'll kind of throw you off the bicycle, and you can't wear trainer wheels all the while. You have to know how to keep that balance. So to pedal along straight without taking a fall, then it's important to hang on to any one or more things which actually are you. I'm not saying the other things are not you, but there's something very in core inside which is you, which you enjoy doing. And it may be mundane, it may be ridiculous, it may not even be perfect, it may not be beautiful, it may not bring money. It's okay. Like I said, it's okay. But it's keeping you happy. At the end of it, you feel so relaxed. So I have been particular about doing that. So, I kind of write something. I whether it's a small parable or whether it's a poem. Because there was a 10-year gap in between in my career where I was newly married, got a whole, you know how it is when you're married, you're caught up with a lot of new things happening in your life. 10 years I stopped writing and got completely derailed. Till I realized this and then, managed to maintain the balance.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't sleep late unless I'm binging on some serial, which happens on a weekend. And I love time travel serials. Right.
Shabnam, your view. What is your routine like, Shabnam?
So generally, I am like a person, a very disciplined person, in the sense that if I need to do something, then my time and everything would be organized accordingly. And I think daily routine, especially in terms of sleeping and waking up, is might be something to do with age, because in my in my 20s and my 30s, I was more a late night person. So any kind of creative work and writing happened beyond midnight. But nowadays, I've realized in the 40s especially, that what the difference was, that I need quiet space. So whether it is late night or early mornings are both fine, as long as I can get things accomplished when nobody else is around. So I need a lot of silence and uninterrupted time in getting things done. So that is when I do work that I have to work on individually. But other than that, I think in terms of a daily work routine, once you are up from 9 to 6, that regular office routine time, there are so many calls, because essentially we are a network person. I'm a network person. So a lot of time goes in meeting people, in talking to people, in discussing ideas, even from work from home. In fact, work from home is worse, because now we have webinars that go late into the night across time zones. So that
Yeah.
has been challenging, but that is the way the routine has worked. I don't. Before before this COVID thing, I don't remember having slept beyond 6 hours. So it's generally less than 6 hours. And I think now with COVID, it might be 6.5 to 7 hours. So whatever time I will sleep, that is the time that I will wake up automatically. But now I'm more an early morning person. And because if I say 6.5 hours, it also means that my night stretches till midnight. But I try to do the informal catch-ups, the relationships, friendships, the family part, and everything is beyond in the evenings, beyond work hours, and the work aspect is during the daytime. So I keep those boundaries as much as possible. Weekends, for example, unless it's very crucial, very important, I will not work on professional stuff during the weekends. I'll try to pick up a novel to read, or do like I'll watch a serial or whatever, but not during the week. So during the work week, it's very work focused, and weekends is for my own growth and relaxation. So that's more or less what it's like.
Okay, this is very interesting. Two separate views. One is soothe yourself, keep yourself in the center, and the other says be focused whenever you are, and whenever you are out of that zone, then you are on that other zone, and then you don't think about the other part of your thing, which is very interesting to take home. Such a interesting weekend to have, both of you, and Dr. Joy was such a surprise. So Shabnam had not told me you're joining in, so I had no idea.
He was asked to join in last minute as well, and I was requested her.
Springs a surprise.
I was not really aware of this part, or I would have read up a little bit on what about you
No,
also, and
that's
I would
fine.
have. Okay, we'll call it. It's about, we are gone more than an hour into this conversation, and I'm sure we can go on and on. There's so much to know more. But let's have your final words from both of you. What do you want to leave as a message to the participants? And obviously, this will be on YouTube, so this will go to the Bajaj students also. It will be shared with them.
What do you want final words on?
Whatever you like to say, ma'am. Then anything,
Right.
whatever your heart says.
See, I would just like to say that we are going through really tough times with the pandemic, and people's mental moods and health is fluctuating. There's no doubt about it. It's affecting everybody. So one has to watch for that. And this whole process of the pandemic has been one of disempowerment. And I say this because what it has done is it has impacted the whole notion of the future. So it's made the future uncertain. It's made the future non-existent for some people. So there are some people who are worried, those who have, comorbidities, or who are senior citizens like me. Like, are we going to make it out of this? So this process of disempowerment has to be reversed. So you have to create your own future first in your mind. So create a happy place. This is what I've been telling a lot of people. Create a happy place. And every time you feel low and you feel that I don't know what's happening out there in the world, sorry, go to that happy place and stay there for a while. That will help you. And as much as you can, keep away from news and this. So don't overdose on it. You can have it in small measures, but please do not OD on news, because that's really finishing you. Sorry.
I'm sure me and Shabnam both concur on that. We've just, whenever we speak, I think we have some comments on how the media is behaving.
Yeah, seriously. No, I think my last words will be that I think we got this entire pandemic has been an opportunity for us to think of a new normal. And if we can, or if we are in a position, and whatever we have, we can, I think the new normal that we decide for ourselves will have to be more thought about. The blind following that we have done till now has to go, and we need to rediscover, like whatever we have rediscovered in these 6 months, I'm saying, sorry, in these 3 months is something that we need to take forward. So decide what you want to be, which is the new you that you want to take forward, and that's most important.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Shabnam, for joining us this evening. Thank you so much, Dr. Joy, for joining in. I wish we could have a longer conversation, but I think time is an essence, and obviously, I hope to see Shabnam when I'm in Delhi and catch up for some good dinner with her whenever I am. Thank you so much.
Jungle.
Jungle. So I still remember once you took me to eat the Iranian food. So it's still, the taste lingers with me. So I would choose the Iranian food.
Great.
So thank you so much, both of you, for joining us this evening. It's such a humbling experience, because you get, last few episodes what we have focused on is on the stock market and to the professional industry based of it, and people coming from various industries. This was a whole contrast. We went to CSR, we went to sustainable development. We looked at the other side, which normally as individuals we ignore. And I feel very critical about us as such. When I say us, I mean Indians. Or maybe I have to use the word Bharat now. So yeah. So we use the word chalta hai and jugaad very loosely. And I am very, very critical of those two, because I feel we need to step up on that two levels. It can't be any more chalta hai, and you cannot have a makeshift arrangement for everything. You need to go up and address everything and fix it, because it is not about you and me. We all have sustained about half of our life or more than half of our life, but it's for the next generation, and you have to leave something back for them. You can't leave something back for them which is incomplete. So that's something which I feel very critical. It's very important for this generation which is right now passing through this phase. So thank you so much for joining in, and I hope we get this opportunity to meet both of you and have this conversation post-pandemic or maybe next year when things will look much better. Thank you so much for agreeing to join us this evening, Shabnam, on a very short notice. And I'm lost for words a little bit right now, so I'm repeating.
That's it.
Thank you, Shabnam.
Thank you to the participants for staying on for all this while also. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, there are so many beautiful words which have come because I think both people are quite impressed. A lot of them have loved listening to both of you. I am hooked and I'm going to follow you both on LinkedIn. So you're going to get stalked. You're going to get stalked by one of the participants. And for Dr. Joy is only saying thank you for listening to us patiently. That is too humble, Dr. Joy. There's another person who's saying it's so nice listening to two amazing women. Both have different views, yet the same goal. That is the best version. Thank you so much. And one person says, thank you so much, Shabnam and Dr. Joy. Enjoyed this session thoroughly. Right. So thank you so much. And I hope to see you, both of you, someday soon in person and have these conversations over some actual coffee. And
thanks. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yep,
okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I take your leave to end this webinar. Next weekend, we join with VP Raja. He's an ex-MERC chief and an IS officer, and we'll get into some in-depth political conversations with him. So I hope to see you all next week, Saturday at 5 p.m. same time. Thank you.
Sure.